Okay. Oops. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I know the weather has not been fantastic this week, so double appreciation for those of you who have come this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Mark Lantain. I'm a senior research fellow here at NUPI, specializing in Chinese foreign policy and economic relations. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon as part of two different projects going on at NUPI right now. The first is the Nordic China Speaker Series, which has been going on throughout the year. We've had many distinguished speakers, including our presenter today. And the second project is also one which has been going on for quite some time at NUPI, the Norway Meets Europe series. And certainly this is an area which is growing in interest, especially just over the past few months, with all kinds of things going on with the European Union. So we're very pleased to welcome this afternoon Professor Zhong Jining, who will be speaking on the political and strategic relationship, the changing relationship between China and the European Union. To talk about Professor Song's background, well, I know it's a bit of a cliche to talk about somebody wearing many hats, but in this case, Professor Song definitely falls under that category. His primary position is Jean Monnet Professor ad personam at Renmin University in Beijing in China. But he has many other positions. I definitely can't name them all, but certainly among the most prominent, the academic coordinator of the Jean Monnet European Center at Renda, the research director for European Studies at Renmin University, the director of the Institute of Comparative Regional Integration Studies at Tsinghua University, also in Beijing, and also the China director of the Brussels Academy for China and European Studies. And he's also very active in other organizations, including regional integration studies in Bruges, Belgium. He also serves as the vice president of the China Association of European Studies, vice president of the China Association of European Politics, and vice president of the China Association of British Studies. He's also been very active in terms of publications. He's a member of the editorial and advisory boards of several prominent journals, including the Review of International Studies and Pacific Review. And his research interests are also quite varied. In addition to China-Europe relations, he's also researched and written quite a bit on international relations theory, political economy, organizations, and regional integration in the Asia-Pacific. So we're very pleased to have him here this afternoon. He has some recent publications I should make note of, including a new book, EU-China 40-Year Diplomatic Relations. This is from the China University Political Science and Law Press, came out very recently. And there are other publications on China-Europe relations coming out soon, so definitely keep an eye out for them. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Song, who will be discussing the increasingly complex relationship between China and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mark. So it's a great pleasure for me to come here to give a talk on EU-China relations. So because the time limits, what I would like to talk is mainly 2 points. First is how to look at the EU-China strategic partnership from 2003 to 2012. The so-called 10-year EU-China comprehensive strategic partnership. So it's a process or it's a reality. The second point is mainly talk about new Chinese leadership, Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping and EU-China relations, how to look at the new development of the Chinese policy towards the EU. So that's the main topic I will discuss today. First, look at the EU-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership from 2003 and 2012. There are lots of debate if there's a real EU-China strategic partnership or it's only on the paper. So there's still a big debate. So if we look at the 10 years EU-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, it seemed to me it's basically a kind of process. Or we say it's a kind of goal, or even say it's a long-term goal for both sides to work together. But it's not a reality. But according to the Chinese governmental point of view, or the governmental publications, actually the Chinese government recognizes that it has been EU-China comprehensive strategic partnership. So that's a kind of debate, how to look at this. So in terms of the 10 years EU-China strategic partnership, we need to look at first the year when EU and China start to talk about the strategic partnership. So that's my word, is to talk about. It's not to establish. So basically it's 2003. So 2003 is quite a special year for EU-China relations. We know that's the Iraqi war. So, and also the debates among EU member states on the Iraqi war. There are some member states support it and some not support it. There's a big debate. Then is the Solana report. So the EU security strategy. So actually it's the Solana reports firstly talking about the strategic partnership with Japan, Canada, China, and India. So that's the very important thing, is to, from both sides, to start to talk about EU-China strategic partnership. Chinese at that time was very, very happy about the idea. It's because it's not China say we would like to have a strategic partnership with EU, but EU, the Solana report say EU would like to have the strategic partnership with China. So that's probably the first time. So I think we know that in 1999, Chinese and Americans are also talk about strategic partnership. Then the embassy bombing, so no one talk that again. So then it's very important. So why China is very enthusiastic about the strategic partnership? First is because it's the requirement from the European side. The second is very important, is how Chinese look at the EU-US relationship at that time, because the Iraqi war, because the debate about this. So at that time, there are also debates within China is how to look at the transatlantic relations. So many governmental people, even the governmental think tanks, so regarded the transatlantic relations was in very serious trouble. So that's also the idea, is to have more tight relationship with EU. Then it's also to use the European Union as a counterpart or the balancer to the United States. So that's if we see the basic background of the so-called EU-China strategic partnership. So from that year, so both sides start to talk about this. And also that's the first to appear in the EU-China joint declaration of the summit. And we also notice that that's also the year for the Chinese Foreign Ministry to publish the first policy paper on EU. It's the first policy paper on certain country or region by Chinese government. It's the first. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. Then how to look at the real meaning of the strategic partnership. So that's my personal idea. So I'm a person not very favored for the EU-China strategic partnership. So even for the first EU-China think tank roundtable in 2004, we had first EU-China think tank roundtable. So just before the EU-China summit in Den Haag. So I checked the records by the EPC. There's still the record of the debate. I'm the person say it's not good to, it's a good, not a good definition for EU-China as the strategic partnership. I prefer EU-China as a working partner instead of the strategic partnership. So why we have this kind of debate? So we know that's also 2003 and 2004, lots of people regarded the year as the EU-China honeymoon. So at that time, we also, I think I had this debate with David Shumbo. So David Shumbo in 2005, she mentioned that honeymoon was over. So my debate is actually there's never honeymoon. The honeymoon is only an imagined honeymoon. It's not a real one because it's the honeymoon without marriage. So that's the so-called strategic partnership. Why we talk about honeymoon is because we talk about is EU-China strategic partnership. So so how to look at the EU-China strategic partnership? Even we say from 2003 to 2012 for the 10 years. So I think when we look at the EU-China strategic partnership, we can say that it's a kind of strategic partnership without clearly defined common strategic interests. That's one problem of the EU-China strategic partnership. So both sides are not clear what the real strategic, the common strategic interests. So people talk about EU was important for China, China was important for EU, but not from the common strategic interests, the perspective. Actually, I say it's not the common interest. Actually, it's the self-interest. So that's, I think, is a problem at that time. And secondly, we say it's a kind of strategic partnership with EU sanction on China. So even now, still the EU sanction, the arms embargo is still there. So it's a kind of EU sanction on China. So we can't imagine a strategic partnership with one party have sanction on another party. So it's a real strategic partnership, or it's only a partnership. That's a kind of, so that's the, my argument is EU-China strategic partnership is a kind of engagement instead of a reality. So both sides would like to work towards this direction. It's a long-term goal, but it's not a reality. So that's we say it's a 10-year imagined strategic partnership. It's not a real strategic partnership. It's also very clear is that both EU and China actually had a very different idea about strategic partnership. So at that time, China has not many strategic partnership, not like now. So, but still, if you have strategic partnership with everyone, then what's the real meaning of this strategic partnership? So I think at 2003, China had 25 strategic partnerships, something like that. EU had 9 strategic partnerships. So now we know China now has, we don't know, so every month there's one more, something like that. If the Xi Jinping goes somewhere, and then there's some other strategic partnership. Now we call a global strategic partnership network. So it also means actually strategic partnerships not such important. So that's the idea is how to look at the strategic partnership. So why for the 10 years China and EU was not established a real strategic partnership? I think there are 3 major pluses for the EU-China relations. For both sides, not very clear. So that's, I had this publication both in English and also in China. So to argue that, how to look at EU-China relations. So there are 3 very important things that actually for quite a long time, both sides are not very clear. First is how to define EU-China relations. Second, how to position EU and China in the world. Third is how important EU and China in the foreign policy agenda from each side. So that's actually for quite a long time. So when we look at EU-China relations from 2003 to 2012, we know that 2006 is a very important year because 2005, the European Union decided not to discuss the issue of arms embargo. That also means the European Union would keep the arms embargo, will not lift, will not discuss the lift of arms embargo issue. Even now, we look at the new EU policy paper, it's still very clear. We'll keep the arms embargo on China. So that's in this sense at that time. So we know that then it's the 2006, the new policy paper from the EU towards China. So then the problem of the Olympic issue, and also the Sarkozy's meeting with Dalai Lama, and then the postpone of EU-China summit. That's in 2008. So it seems to me from 2006 to 2012, both sides actually is a rethink of the EU-China relations, very much around these three issues, how to look at. It's also say how to rethink of EU-China relations. So when we talk about how to define the EU-China relations, it's still around how to look at the so-called comprehensive strategic partnership. Is EU-China comprehensive strategic partnership or comprehensive cooperation partners? So there some academic discourse and governmental discourse. The governmental discourse is say the Chinese government worked very hard and then to have the EU-China relationships step by step to go forward from a long-term relationship to comprehensive cooperation and to strategic partnership. So what's the difference? So I had an argument with the Chinese government in a small meeting. So at that time, Yang Jiechi was the foreign minister. So Fu Ying was the deputy minister in charge of European affairs. Invite a small group. I openly argue about this because that's the publication by Yang Jiechi. I say what the real meaning to have this step forward. So what the difference? So actually, he had no answer. He had say it only means EU is important for China. So that's the debate. Or we can say even people argue it's EU and China kind of competitive partner. So in China, competitive really usually is a negative word. But we say the competitive partners not necessarily a negative word. It's a kind of, how to say, the nature of the normal relationship. So every normal great power relationship has to have competitive elements. And also we talk about EU-China strategic partnership without common language or without common understanding. So that's especially in 2003. So we argue about the 2003, the version of EU-China strategic partnership. If we look at the Solana report, strategic partnership in the European security strategy actually is the third level. So first level, transatlantic. The second level, EU and Russia. The third level, and also puts Canada, India, Japan, China together. So there are another very important element from the Solana report is with all others who share the common value with the European Union. Then the argument is China share the common value with EU? If not, so how to define China as a strategic partnership with the European Union? That's there also certain, we call the self-contradiction. But for the Chinese side, especially 2003 and 2004, comprehensive strategic partnership is regarded as the top level of the foreign relations. So actually, so that's a big debate. So then gradually, I think both China and the EU still use the comprehensive strategic partnership as a discourse. So because we also understand that if we change this discourse, then that also means something. So why you don't use this? Is there some problem? So we still use this term, but I think more understanding about this is not a real one. So that's the how to define this. So I think especially 2010, 2011, there's a big debate in China. So how to look at the real meaning? It's only on the paper, or is the real meaning of the EU-China strategic partnership? I think even now, most of people will agree. So EU-China strategic partnerships mainly in the economic fields. So the second is how to position EU and China in the world. It's how to look at EU and China in the world. So that's always a debate. So that's EU and China is a global power or a regional power. So how to look at these two so-called great power in China, in the world economics? Everyone will agree, yes. So because it's the two of the three major economy in the world: United States, EU, and China. So definitely. So, but in other fields, political and security, probably it's not. So that's always also the debate. I think even now there's a debate, like how to look at China. Is China a great power? Or is China still a kind of regional power? Or is last month we had a debate. We had a conference in Helsinki. Also have this argument. Some people say yes, China is the global power just next to the United States. So my argument is look at Xi Jinping's Chinese dream. What's Chinese dream? First, it's a good life for Chinese people. Second, the great power position of China. If China has been a great power, then the Chinese dream has realized. But even according to Xi Jinping, it's another 50 years. So China will be a real a global great power. So that's the kind of debate. So there also debate is how to look at EU. So economically, yes, but politically or even security, in the security sense, EU is still not a global actor. So because of the common foreign and security policy, it's still a two-track policy. The member states still play a dominant role. It's not the European Union, so there's still a problem. So I think for quite a long time, both sides had this kind of problem. So when we look at EU, I think EU always overestimated China. So many European countries regarded China as a superpower even more than 10 years ago. So then it's that's my argument is the European Union overestimated China and overestimated EU itself. It's too optimistic. When look at China, so I think the problem of China is China always overestimated EU. Yes, China actually very supports the European integration. China would like EU as a strong union. That's the Chinese willing. But actually, the European Union is not the reality to be that kind of thing. So the people will argue actually China, even now, Chinese more support European integration than Europeans. So that is very much because of the traditional Chinese thinking or Chinese foreign policy strategies, balance of power. So and like have EU as one of the power and to balance the United States. That's the Chinese idea, but we say that's not a reality. So that's, I think, China's always overestimated EU, overestimated the strength, how to say the capabilities of EU, overestimated independence of EU, and very importantly, is always overestimated problem between EU and the United States. So that's, I think, the Chinese misunderstanding of the European Union. And sometimes we say probably China is also underestimated China itself. So before Xi Jinping, it seems to me the Chinese leadership always follow Deng Xiaoping's keep low profile. It's not to be the head of anything, no initiative. So pay more attention to the internal instead of external issues. So that's also people argue about the so-called China as a responsible power. That's sometimes I have this argument with our American friends and European friends, and sometimes I also have this arguments with my Chinese friends. Because Europeans and Americans always say, you should be a responsible power. You should be means you haven't been. So I say China has been a responsible power. But Chinese governments sometimes also say, we would like to be a responsible power. I say it's wrong. We have had, we are a responsible power. So even the Chinese government is not very confident, say we are a responsible power. So that's also how to define. So it's a problem how to define the responsible power. So that's also means. So if we look at that, it's how to look at EU and China in the world. Then you can see how to look at EU-China relations. So that's, I think, is also a problem. Third one is how important EU and China in foreign policy agenda. So I think both EU and China, the foreign policy priority is first, United States. Second, neighborhood policy. And third, probably some other important power, the relationship. Then it's very clear how to look at EU in Chinese foreign policy agenda and China in the EU foreign policy agenda. EU, we always say EU-China relations is very important, but not most important. It's very clear. So for China, most important is the United States. The second is the neighbors. So we always say EU is #1 trade partner of China. Yes. But we have more trade with Japan and South Korea than European Union. 40% of China's foreign trade is with neighboring country. We say 10 plus 2 plus 2 is 40% of China's foreign trade. 10 is ASEAN 10, 2, Japan, South Korea. Another 2, Hong Kong and Taiwan. So I think not many people realize that mainland China has more trade with Taiwan than with Germany. Very few people realize that's reality. So Germany is the #1 trade partner of China among the EU members. But lack of Taiwan. Hong Kong's always #3 trade partner of mainland China. It's a funny issue. So that's the reality. So if we look at the troublesome issue of China, always with neighbors. So the economic relationship, the neighbors, it's very important for China. So we have more trade, even in this sense, we can say we have more trade with 10 plus 2 plus 2 than EU plus United States. So EU's #1 trade partner of China, about 14% of China's trade. American, 13%. Together, 27. We have 40% with neighbors. That's in terms of the trade. So that's very important. And the security issue. So we know recently the East China Sea, South China Sea, all the territory issues, India, Pakistan, is, even Russia. So then people always say, so how to look at Russia and Japan. So very interesting, especially recent year. So Japan was not regarded as a great power by Chinese. So when we talk about great power relationships, not include Japan. So Russia, yes or not, but they all include the neighbor, the Chinese neighborhood policy. So that's very interesting. If we look at EU, I think the same. Transatlantic relationship is the number one priority, and then the neighborhood, especially the enlargement of EU. Then you have more troublesome neighbors, Middle East, so North Africa. So that's also very important. If we look at the recent years, the problem, the refugee, the immigration problem, always your neighbors. So neighborhood policy is more important. Then we'll see the other important power. Then we can see probably EU-China is the third level of Chinese foreign policy. China probably also the third, even lower, the foreign policy agenda in the European Union. So that's also, we say, I can't remember, I kind of how to use this thing. The Chinese word, very popular Chinese word called 忽悠, you know? 忽悠 means not to talk too much, so you are so good, that's actually, so you say something, but it's not real in your heart. So that's the say. So we need to be very clear. So you are important for us, we are important for you, but not most important. Then in this sense, how to manage our relationship. So I think that's the, if we look at the 10 years, so-called EU-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. So that's, I think, also the reality. Then we go to see the second point is how to look at the new Chinese leadership. So the Xi Jinping actually is, if we look at from 2013. So 2013 is also the new Chinese government. So Xi Jinping as the head of the party is end of 2012. So then we see a kind of new change of EU-China relations, or the basically the Chinese policy towards EU. So I just briefly defined it as a new leadership, new style, new preference, and new policy. So if we look at Xi Jinping and EU-China relations. So when we talk about the new leadership, it's actually the Xi Jinping. Now we don't talk about Xi regime. So we used to talk about Jiang Zemin, and Zhu Rongji. Or then we talk about Hu Jintao, and Wen Jiabao. So Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, firstly, people talk about Xi and Li, and then people talk only Xi, no Li. So then it's also a change of the leadership. It's the re-centralization in Chinese politics or Chinese leadership. So I think it's very clear. So if we look at the foreign policy making, it's very clear it's a new division of labor or no division of labor in foreign policy making. Before, it's very clear. If we look at Hu and Wen, especially when we look at the 10 years EU-China strategic partnership, at that time, Wen Jiabao, the prime minister, was in charge of policy towards EU. Hu Jintao in charge of Russia, United States, and Japan. So Wen Jiabao in charge of European Union and ASEAN, Southeast Asia. So they're kind of division of labor. Division of labor also means competition. So especially for the previous 10 years, we know that at that time the Chinese saying there's 9 member of standing committee. We call the non-member 9 voices. Means they are not united. They have their own competition. Then we know there is the biggest tiger, so the corruption. So Zhou Yongkang. So that's the private leadership. So it's very clear. So then it's also for this kind of re-centralization, we can argue is good or not good for China. But in terms of the foreign policy, it seems to me it's more efficiency and lack of internal competition. It's good or not. Still, if in long term we still need to wait and see. But if we look at recent years, actually it's very much more efficient. So it's not like before. So it's, it seems to me it's better than before. That's we call the new leadership as the re-centralization. So Xi Jinping as the only one. To have the decision making power. The new style is, if we look at the new leadership in terms of the policy towards the EU, it seems to me it's more pragmatic. It's more pragmatic than before. So how to look at the pragmatic policy towards the EU from the Chinese leadership? As one very important thing is they don't focus on the 2 big issues like Wen Jiabao. Wen Jiabao from the first year of his power is talking about the arms embargo and market economy status. Every year, every time, every occasion. So put this as a very and talk too much about the comprehensive strategic partnership. So it's a very interesting, on the one hand, talk about the comprehensive strategic partnership. On the other hand, talk about 2 big issues, arms embargo and market economy status. So that's always the big problem between China and the EU. So if we look at the new leadership, it's very clear. They try to avoid the 2 big issues. Actually, it's 2 big issues. We can say it's all mission impossible, but some actually is mission impossible. So the 2013, the first EU-China summit with the new Chinese leadership is the first time. There are no mention of the 2 big issues in the joint declaration. It's the first time. So we'll not talk about this publicly. We can discuss this privately. So it's an issue. We recognize it's an issue. We know it's not easy to solve. It's not because of the political will. It's because of the system. Because arms embargo needs the unanimous voting. So then it's almost impossible to solve this problem. So several years ago, I was interviewed by New York Times. I mentioned this. I said we had an unfair competition with the United States on the arms embargo issue because we need to persuade all 25, at that time 25, to say yes. But the United States needs only to persuade 1 to say no. In this game, no chance for China to win. So just have this problem aside. So, and not have this problem to be a major obstacle for EU-China. So I think for the new leadership, it's very clear. So for the last, now they have had 3 summits. The first 2 summits, no mention this issue. And 3rd summit, no joint declaration. So it's very clear. So that means it's very much pragmatic to work on what we can work together. And also the second, we can see if from 2013, so more pragmatic cooperation. We see the EU-China 2020 strategy. It's very detailed, what EU and China can work together. Very detailed things. And another thing is also very much domestic orientation. So to work with EU, very much related to the Chinese domestic needs or domestic reform issue. So like the clean energy or the urbanization, all those. And very important is both sides strongly emphasize innovation. So that's, I think, is more pragmatic. I think it's the new style. It's not like Wen Jiabao always, even I think 2012, the last EU-China summit, Wen Jiabao attended in Brussels during the press conference, he still argues, I worked very hard for 10 years, trying to solve these two problems, but I'm very upset. So not solve this. And in China, even lots of Chinese say it's two issues cannot be solved. Why you pay too much attention? Use so many energy to solve this, to try work on these two issues. So that's also, in this sense, we see the big difference, the current leadership and the previous leadership. The new preference, or we can say changing preference, actually it's not new. So lack of personal preference. That's we argue about Wen Jiabao. So Wen Jiabao actually has too much personal preference in the policy towards the EU. So because he started this 2003, I mentioned the very important year of 2003. And also Wen Jiabao regards the two issues, if he can solve these two issues, actually it's a big political achievement. It's also a kind of competition with Hu Jintao in foreign policy. But now we say that the current leadership has not such kind of personal preference. So another is very important is lack of intention to use EU as the balancer to the United States. So because the private leadership is a problem, is I say it is overestimated problem between EU and the United States. Then use EU as a balancer to the United States is very much a preference for the Chinese foreign policy. I think for the current leadership, I think Chinese like to use EU as a balancer to the United States. But realistically, I think the current leadership realizes that it's impossible. So it's very clear. It's also because Xi Jinping managed both. So how to work with the United States and how to work with EU. So work with EU is work with EU. It's not always linked with others. So work with the United States, how EU and China and the United States can work together, and how China and EU can work together. Even we know that's the big debate on TTIP. There also in China, actually it's not many big debates to say that TTIP is bad for China or TTIP is a kind of containing China. So that's it's not like before. So that's also we see the new preference, the lack of personal preference, the lack of intention to make use of the contradiction between EU and the United States. New policy, I think, is we know that's the Xi Jinping's 3-2 is in 2013. Before the first new leadership with the EU leaders, the EU-China summit, he mentioned about the EU and China two forces for the global peace, two markets for world economy, and two orange for world civilization or human civilization. That is very clear. I think the important thing is to use this three tools to look at how to look at EU and China in the world. So two major forces for global peace. More importantly, two major markets for world economy. Culturally, two oranges for the world civilization. So there also means we are more closed. In this sense, EU and China more closed culturally than US and China. So that's to define EU and China in the world and to look at the commonality between EU and China. So that's, and also I think according to these three tools, we know that's the 2014. Xi Jinping came to Europe to visit first the Netherlands and then France, Germany, and then EU headquarters and Belgium. Then just after his visit, the Chinese Foreign Ministry published the new China policy paper. So actually the second day after Xi Jinping returned back China from Europe. So, but the basic things, the four partnership, actually Xi Jinping mentioned this in his speech at Bruges, the so-called four bridges. And then it's so-called EU-China. How to look at EU-China partnership? It's a partnership for peace, partnership for growth, partnership for reform, and partnership for civilization. It's also the Chinese side to define the EU-China partnership. So we say it's a kind of the four partnerships, and also a kind of new strategic partnership between EU and China. So if we look at the so-called four partnership, it's the governmental saying. So the governmental policy paper is mentioned that, but we still have the debate with the foreign ministry. Say the four partnership is too Chinese. So we need to something is to have China, Chinese, and Europeans can have more mutual understanding. So we have the new version. So for the partnership for peace, we put partnership for peace and security. Because it seems to us security is a new field of cooperation. Before we are not talk lots about EU-China security cooperation, but now security actually is a very important things for EU-China relations, especially non-traditional security. Not only global security, but also regional security. We know it's not only so. So usually we always talk about EU-China security cooperation, the global one, but now it also refers to the regional one. East Asia regional security. How to look at the role of EU. European regional security, also the role of China, like Ukraine. There's a place. So how to work together. So we work on this issue actually 2 years ago. Now we have a new publication. So there's Europeans and Chinese and the Singapore. We have several universities work together. So now we have published a book on EU-China security relations. It's just, I think, published last month by Cambridge University Press. It's 10 chapters, 7 chapters related to the non-traditional security. Cyber security, economic security, human security, organized crime and anti-corruption, all this kind of things. And still also the traditional security issue. But more importantly is the EU-China security cooperation in the non-traditional issues. So for the partnership for growth, we put growth and development. So it seems to us development is more important than growth, because China always talk about the growth. But we say actually Deng Xiaoping not talk about growth. Deng Xiaoping says development is everything. He didn't say growth is everything. Chinese always say the growth of Chinese economies contribute lots to the world economy. But we'll always agree that someone paid the price for Chinese growth. So then development is more important. It refers to the sustainable development for both EU and China. All have the problem for the sustainable development. So regional development in both, so the East Asia, Europe, all refers to the regional development. And global development is also very important. And it's also a kind of field for EU and China work together for the global development. So that's the argument for the partnership for reform and governance. So the Chinese government's discourse is partnership for reform. We say reform is too Chinese. And governance is a European idea, so why not put them together? Reform and governance. And governance, it seems to us, more relevant. Internally, we talk a lot about reform. But externally, if you talk about too much reform, then people will argue you would like to change the existing international order, then to challenge the United States. It's actually it's a dangerous thing. So it says more on the governance. And also, after Xi Jinping came into power, he also mentioned the fifth modernization of Chinese in China. We usually talk about the four modernization, and Xi Jinping talked about the fifth modernization, is governance. So we say for governance, we have the internal governance issue in EU and China. We can talk about the regional governance with EU and China. Usually we always, in terms of the East Asia regional governance, we always say how to look at, how to learn from the Europeans. But actually now we can say, so for both regional governance, actually it's not only we look at you, we learn from you, and we can work together. So a good example is AIIB. Many European countries joined AIIB. So then AIIB seems to me usually is a kind of regional arrangement. Now AIIB was forced to be a global arrangement by Europeans, by your participation of AIIB. Now it's more than 50 members of the AIIB. And also China has formally joined the European Construction Bank. So that means for the regional governance, we are work together. It's not only to learn from each other, now it's cooperate with each other for the regional governance in EU and in Europe and in East Asia, and global governance by EU and China. So that's the global governance issue is very important for both sides. We quietly work quite good for the EU and China. So finally, partnership for civilization. Our argument is civilization, so we are two oranges of the human civilization, but not the only. So not talk too much about the cooperation of civilization. So Otherwise, other civilization people will not be happy about this. So probably more pragmatic or more realistic is the partnership for culture. We can say we are very closed. Culturally, it's very closed. Let's not say civilizationally we are very closed. So civilization is a good word and sometimes a dangerous word. We know now the problem. So in the world, it's a kind of like the Huntington's view of clash of civilization. So culturally, it's more acceptable and more pragmatic. And if we see the EU-China high-level people-to-people dialogue, China has 5 high-level people-to-people dialogue with others. China, United States, China, Russia, China, EU, China, France, and China, UK. 3 of them with European countries. It also means, so culturally we are very close. We can work together. So that's the idea. So for the partnership. So there's governmental discourse on this, but we have our own interpretation. So after Xi Jinping's visit and the new publication, because we involved in this kind of policy paper design, then we publish a paper, so in Chinese publicly argue that it should be plus. So peace and security, growth and development, reform and governance, civilization and culture. Then it can have more mutual understanding. Otherwise, the Europeans will say, what's the meaning of the so-called four partnership? It's too Chinese. So we know that's the, I think it's also, especially in the public diplomacy issue. So Chinese pay very much attention to play the game of public diplomacy. But the problem is no one understood what the Chinese talk, especially the governmental people talking about. That's the major issue. So that's, we are debate with the Chinese government about the new policy. But actually, we see it's more pragmatic, more clear than before is the so-called EU-China comprehensive strategic partnership. Because also the argument is EU and China cannot be comprehensive. That's my personal view. Because the European common policy is not comprehensive. It's because the European Union. You can't work everything with EU. Something you can work with EU, something you cannot work with EU, because there's no common policy by the European Union. So that's also depends on the basic feature of the EU system. Then we know everyone, Norway is also how to say, we call the EU member states without membership, right? But still, you need to work with both. So the member state level and European level. So that's the that's the rule of game with EU. So that's if we look at the in conclusion. So I think I still seems to me so EU-China relations in actually is in a new era because of the Chinese new leadership and also because of the European new leadership. So the EU-China try to work more closely. So that's the very clear. So it's because of the foundation and the common interest. And EU-China relations depends more upon, it seems to me, the development of EU and China itself. That's, I think, is still the crucial issue, how European Union developed and how China itself developed. So, but that's also, we always say this, is the EU-China cannot be worse because otherwise it's very dangerous for both and for the whole world. And EU-China may not be better because EU-China is still too far away. So that's my conclusion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very, very comprehensive overview of the EU-China relationship. Very enjoyable. Before I open the floor to questions, I just wanted to make a few very brief comments on some of the issues spoken of and some of the issues that might be coming up very soon in the near future when we talk about this very complicated relationship. First of all, what has been happening over the past 2 years, one cornerstone of Xi Jinping's foreign policy has been the so-called一带一路 Belt and Road project. And certainly Europe is very much in the center of this. There has been a great deal of debate in European capitals as well as in Brussels about what the Belt and Road might mean, both in terms of maritime and overland trade, as well as how this might change the cross-regional relationship between the two countries. And this has been going on at the same time as you mentioned, new institutions, organizations in the economic realm are being put forward by China. You have the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, of which many Western European and Eastern European countries are now members, with potentially more to follow. I heard there was some discussion about Belgium joining at some point in the near future. We have other institutions such as the New Development Bank, and there's the debate about whether or not that presents a challenge to Western institutions, or will they complement these groups? So this is all being debated right now. I think the second point, which is also a bit key, like it's been an old problem. Whenever someone wants to talk to the European Union, who do they call? Do they call Brussels? Do they call Berlin, Paris, London? Maybe not London. But even now, though, there's still the question about when we talk about the EU, where is kind of the center of decision-making, the centers of power, which we can certainly argue have begun to shift. But what else is happening, and this is something which China is acknowledging, is that Beijing is now taking, in some cases, a kind of sub-regional approach to Europe. There's been a great deal of discussion, for example, of the 16+1 talks, which have been going on with key governments in Central and Eastern Europe, many countries which may participate directly in the Belt and Road. There's also been some lower-level discussion about specific Chinese talks with Mediterranean states, again, which may play a role in the maritime Silk Road. And at the same time, there's also been some discussion, and this has been a topic of previous presentations here, about the possibility of a 5+1, specifically the Nordic states plus China, in keeping with, for example, the recent meetings between President Obama and Nordic governments, as well as the whole question of maybe a Nordic model towards China specifically. So I'd be curious to get your views on that. And one final point before I put things open to questions. You mentioned security, which obviously is a very important issue in much of East Asia right now. It's certainly been a major issue over the past few months. There's been a lot of questions, though, and this came up at the most recent Shangri-La dialogue. There was a discussion about perhaps Europe playing a more active role in regional security, and yet there still is the perception, as you pointed out, that Europe's role in East Asia tends to be very strongly limited to the economic realm, and that any attempt to kind of move into the security area probably will not be seen as particularly viable. So I'd be very curious to get your views on that. So I will conclude my comments here. Maybe what I can do then is to open the floor to questions for Professor Song. Would anyone like to start? Or I may exercise chair privilege if not. Anyone?
Maybe you should respond to some of that.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, okay, so One Belt, One Road, so it's still a debate. When people talk about Europeans always say, so One Belt, One Road is actually China and the EU. But it seems to me it's not really. Although I'm a European studies people, so I would like to say this, but then it's still the argument. The One Belt, One Road is a regional strategy or a global strategy. It's still a kind of debate. People talk about the grand strategy of all the global strategy of Chinese foreign policy. Some people argue that there is a new global strategy. It's basically called OR, so One Belt, One Road, is towards the west. Another is FTAAP, FTA Asia Pacific, so it's the east. So the free trade arrangements Asia Pacific is related to the actually to the United States. It's a kind of things to deal with the TPP. So it's not only TPP, we would like to more, and then China can take a role in this. And this side is One Belt, One Road is towards the west, and then from China finally to the European Union. But I think it's still a long way. For the One Belt, One Road, it seems to me first is actually a domestic strategy. It's a kind of new policy to replace the old Western development strategy. So from Zhu Rongji, we know for the last 20 years, the so-called Western development policy actually is not very successful. Then the One Belt, One Road, it seems to me first is to stimulate the western part of China, to have them to play more important role. Actually, for last few years, the One Belt, One Road things, actually there are 18 provinces of the western and southwestern China involved in. They are very interested. I talk about China, Europe railway. The interesting is all from the southwest part of China. So Chongqing, Chengdu, so to Duisburg, to Rhodes, so from the only one is from Yiwu to Madrid. So it's very interesting. It's, I think that's the first things is to the Western development of China. Then it's actually the regional, is how to work with the, it's a kind part of the regional, the neighborhood policy to have this kind of things. So otherwise it's both. The maritimes actually is Southeast Asia. And then the, we call the land road is Central Asia, or include Pakistan, Afghanistan, those parts. And we know that's a very big obstacle actually is Russia. So for those, I think, yes, the final is so-called Euro-Asia, how to say, the Euro-Asia economic development things. So from China to Europe, but I think it's still a long way. How to manage the countries on the road, that's a very crucial issue. So how to work with Central Asia, and then Middle East, and then even we know that's Central Eastern Europe, still also this kind of things. For the 16 plus 1, it seems to me actually 16 plus 1 is the is kind of legacy of Wen Jiabao. So Wen Jiabao had this last year of his position in the government. He had this kind of thing. He always liked to do something unique. We know that he went to Mercosur to talk with Colombia, say, we would like to have FTA with you. Actually, it's totally wrong because they are part of Mercosur. You can't have, like say, I'd like to have FTA with France. So it's totally wrong. And then in the Central Eastern Europe to have 16 plus 1. So the new government has to follow this. So they can say it's wrong, we'll stop. But we know 16 plus 1 actually is 16, 1 plus 1. It's, because 16 is not 1. 16 plus 1 only a forum. So every year, join together to have a talk. If we look at real business, it's 1 plus 1. So even no 2, 3 plus 1. So that's the problem. So in this sense, 5 plus 1 actually is more relevant because 5, not the council, is an organization. So 16 is no organization. So that's, I think, if we look at for the last, actually it's 4 years of the 16 plus 1. actually they're not real achievements in terms of 16+1. The only thing is from Budapest to the railway, the only one. So there's still there are problems. Wen Jiabao promised 10 billion loan, but still there. No one got it. So there also kind of things. So last year is quite funny. So the 16+1 summit, Li Keqiang promised when China work with 16s, will follow the EU rule. So very clear. And then after he returned back China, he made a phone call to Merkel to say this again. So people will argue, why you say this twice? So one is enough. Why you say it especially to Germany? So that's still, I think it's a kind of burden for, it seems to me it's kind of burden for China. So how to manage this kind of things? So if we look at this, so the security issue, if we say that's the debate, some Chinese would like EU to play more important role in security issues in Asia Pacific or in East Asia. Someone may not. For certain issues, someone would like EU to play the role. For others, may not. So basically, if we look at South China Sea and East China Sea, I think the basic Chinese position is like, okay, you have EU have the interest, yeah, because it's very much the trade, the sea lines, and then, but it's mainly a problem between China and the United States. Then the Chinese position may, okay, you keep neutral. So if EU keep a neutral position, it's okay. I think that's all certain constructive role. Not always side of the United States. But another thing is also very interesting is people will argue why EU would not like to play a role in Korean issue. Because actually most of the EU member states and even the European Union have the diplomatic relationship with DPRK. So Japan, no. United States, no. Then there's no role of European Union in Korean issue. So the people will argue why. But we haven't had a clear answer from the European side. Why you not like to play a role? You have the embassy there. You have also the development assistance to the North Korea. So why not play a certain role? So people will argue, so now it's a 6-party talk, why not 7th-party talk? So include the European Union. Because although the EU delegation to North Korea is in Seoul, it's not in Pyongyang. So, but we know many European embassy to North Korea is not in Pyongyang. It's either in Beijing or in Seoul. But you have the diplomatic relationship. So you can play a kind of role. So that's also the argument. So we know that from the from 90s, first EU mentioned about the economic percent in East Asia, then political. But so far there is no so-called new Asia strategy from the European Union. So so we'll see. But actually, EU is part of the ARF. So actually, you have the position there. So it depends how EU can play this kind of role. I don't think China will only oppose the EU's or the security role in Asia Pacific.
Thank you. Ulf?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor, for a very nice expose of Chinese positions towards China. Let me also congratulate you in the way you apparently have tried to influence the framing of some of the Chinese policies towards the EU, because I think you have done it in a most suitable fashion. So you're very right that you kind of the way it's balanced. It's much more attractive, I think, for Europeans. So congratulations on that. Lots of topics I would like to discuss with you, but let's just limit myself to 2 or 3 points. The first, just one small point. I think even a Norwegian is a coach of the North Korean football team. Just to say that. But you said that China would like to see a strong and well-functioning European Union. Last time I was in China this summer, it was a huge concern in China about Brexit and the future of the European construction, whether it would be a credible partner in trade negotiations, and in some sense also China play a vital role about in the discussion about the future role of the UK, because there's this discussion about China moving on with some kind of trade agreement with the UK, etc., and whether they can do that before they leave. So I would like to hear your reflections on how you see, how China see the role of Brexit and the risk and potentials created by that. So that's the first point. Now, the other thing, and that's very consistent with what you said, is that in order to promote cooperation and partnership, the parties should relate to each other's foreign policy agendas. And as you are very well aware of, I think the number one issue in Europe relates to migration and the future instability, or the present and the future instability in Northern Africa, where huge demographic changes, climate changes, etc., will by necessity create a huge pressure on Europe on migration. And this relates to also the successful G20 presidency of China. Now this is moved on, the presidency will move on to Germany. And if I understood it correctly, Germany would like to kind of advocate a huge international agenda for promoting development in the south of Europe. And so how do you see that kind of shared cooperation between Europe, China, US, and probably many others as well, on development in that part of the region in order to stem migration? And then if I have a third point, and because now we talked a lot about EU-China, and but you know, in Europe, it's often you say EU-Asia, and the European Union has a fairly well-established relationship within the framework with ASEAN and the ASEM. And how do you see the relationship between that kind of dialogue with EU, ASEAN, ASEM, and the China? Is there some kind of tension there? Thank you.
Or collect some more?
Are there other questions? Okay, we can come back.
Yeah, for the Brexit, I think it's, how to say, it's from the most of Chinese point of view, Brexit actually is a lose-lose solution. It's both for EU and UK, all loser. So it's not good for both of them. But in terms of the EU-China relations, we'll see. Usually, we say China always prefer a strong European Union. Then it's also the argument is a strong and less coherent European Union, or is a weak and more coherent European Union. So after Brexit, it's a maybe. So with UK, it's a strong, but it's less coherent, because actually UK always a troublemaker of the European integration. So everyone knows that. But without UK, actually, the European Union may more coherent. But for the whole capabilities or capacities, is actually is less. So we'll see. Without UK, EU will not be the #1 trade partner of China. EU will not be the #1 economy in the world. So it's how to deal with two kind of European Union. I think in China is still a debate. So which one is better? But many people say, okay, the Brexit also provides more opportunities for China. So one thing is probably there's more coherent EU. Coherent EU is more easier. It's easier to deal with. So it's better for China. And other thing is because UK is still very important, or actually is a very big power. And China and EU actually has, China and UK has quite good relationship. Even in the economic terms, so people, it seems to me, many Chinese overestimated the economic relationship between China and Germany. Comprehensively, UK even more important than Germany to China. So because it's more comprehensive. So if we look at China and Germany, is more like the trade. Some investment. But if you look at China and UK, UK is #2 trade partner. So next to Germany. And UK is I think from 2012, UK opened the infrastructure investment to China. So China have lots of investment. So for last few years, 25% of China's investment to EU actually is to UK. And also the, we call, how say, the sovereign wealth fund from China. So like the Heathrow and Thames Water actually is the governmental funding, governmental investment. So that's to the UK. So for investment, actually UK is more open than Germany to China. And the third is the finance. So if you trade, finance, investment. And we know it's even like Huawei. So Huawei has a big investment in UK than in the European continent. So that's, people say it's UK, China is the golden age. Actually, it's, it seems to me it's true. I always have this argument with Chinese side. So say it's not underestimated the role of UK, not overestimated the role of Germany. So that's even if you look at the publication by the House of Lords of UK. So I probably is the only one to be there to talk with the committee. So about the EU-China relations, I talk with them like this. They ask me, who is the most important member state with China? So I say it's economically Germany, politically, strategically UK. So UK is comprehensively, UK is more important for China than Germany. Germany actually is mainly the economic field. And economically, it's not only cooperation, but also competition. So that's always this. So in this sense, no matter UK in the European Union or out of European Union, so China and UK still, I think, keep the good relationship. So after the Brexit referenda and the new government, people talk about the nuclear power position project. So at that time, I think the UK is not played game with China, it's UK played game with France. So who are more nervous about the project? It's not China, it's France. So it's a kind of game. So that's finally there. Another thing is the people will argue is, as mentioned, as maybe some kind of free trade arrangement. But I don't think so in the future. But still, we know the Brexit is still a very complicated procedure. So who knows when it's real out. So yeah, we know that the people argue that the parliament has not made a decision. Actually, the British government say the date to negotiate is illegal. Because yes, first the parliament has to decide it's Brexit or not. That's legally. Then how to negotiate. After negotiation, the ratification of the deal by both is very complicated. So people even argued finally UK may still keep in. So because the too complicated procedure. So in this sense, people can talk about, okay, because now it's impossible for China and the EU to have a negotiation of FTA. Maybe if China and UK, if UK really out, and then, so we have had the BIT, so it's not necessary to wait for the BIT with EU. So we have the existing BIT with UK, then we can start FTA. Then there's a big pressure on the European Union, so China can wait, but I think that's still a long way, so who knows. So how to start this kind of process. Then people now keep talking about this. It's only talking. So it's not kind of real, how say the policy is can implement in this sense. So for the development issues, as I mentioned, I think the development issue cooperation is more important than just to put on the growth. I think that's the Hangzhou G20 is also mentioned about that. And I think the President of European Council mentioned very clearly that asked China to take certain responsibility to how to do for those kind of issues. Yeah, I think if you say yes, how many refugees China can take care, I think that's probably it's not acceptable. So maybe can be acceptable by Chinese government. It's definitely not can be acceptable by Chinese people. But if talk about the development cooperation, that I think is possible. But from the Chinese, I think both governmental and ordinary people's view is how to deal with actually the Syria issue. So if in this case, that's the orange of the refugee, and the problem is the unstable situation in that area, and then create those kind of problems. If actually to solve this problem is to keep the regional stability. That's more important. So that's actually need, especially Europeans, Russians, Americans, and Chinese to work together to solve this problem. Otherwise, so there are always a problem, so especially the recent refugee issues. So that's, I think, is very much possible. And then how to have a kind of framework to work on this. Eurasia, yes, I think China very much supports the EU-ASEAN cooperation. China would like to work with ASEAN, and China also would like to work with, how to say, a coherent, strong ASEAN. So that's also is, we can see the ASEAN +1, ASEAN +3, and Eurasia. We call the Asia-Europe Conference, and even the East Asia Summit. Actually, China is very clear, so to have ASEAN to take the leading role for the regional arrangements. then the problem of ASEAN is too weak. So we see a small horse to have a big, how say, the cart. So it's the lack of capacity. So actually, China is very much or in other ways, China's prefer EU-ASEAN, the close relationship, rather than US-ASEAN. So that's a very clear preference.
Excellent. Okay, well, this is a very comprehensive view of what is shaping up to be a two-level game when we talk about China and the European Union, not only bilaterally, but also within their own kind of constituencies and subcategories. So very impressive. Are there any kind of last questions or comments for anyone? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to give a very special thank you to Professor Song for a very, very professional, very, very well-reasoned talk about the kind of past and very likely future of the China-Europe relationship. So thank you very much.
Thank you.